Now welcome representatives of the Australian Communications Consumer Action Network by video conference and in person. I understand that information on parliamentary privileges and the protection of witnesses giving evidence to Senate committees has been provided to you. I see nodding at the table. Yes, thank you, Ms Bennett. And for the Hansard record, will you please state your full names, the capacity in which you appear today?
Thank you, Chair. Carol Bennett, and I'm the CEO of ACCAN.
Dr. Gareth Downing, Deputy CEO of ACCAN.
Thank you very much. I invite you to make a short opening statement, and at the conclusion of your remarks, I will invite members of the committee to ask questions.
Thank you, Chair. Well, good morning, Senators, and on behalf of the Australian Communications Consumer Action Network, or ACCAN, I'd like to thank the committee for the opportunity to speak on this landmark piece of legislation, the Telecommunications Legislation Amendment Universal Outdoor Mobile Obligation Bill of 2025, or UOMO, I'll refer to it from here. ACCAN is the peak national consumer advocacy organisation for communications. We advocate for affordable, accessible and reliable communications for all Australians, whether they live in metro areas, country towns, regional and rural Australia, or in some of the most remote communities in the country. ACCAN welcomes this bill as a necessary and overdue reform, and in particular the bill's empowerment of the Minister to make direct, enforceable reliability standards. However, ACCAN does have some concerns, as outlined in our submission to this committee, about the affordability of mobile services and devices under the UOMO framework. We're in the midst of a significant and ongoing cost of living crisis, and international events are only likely to increase this, possibly for several years. In this context, ACCAN is concerned that the affordability of mobile services, already a cause of concern for many Australians, will continue to be an issue under the UOMO framework without safeguards in place to ensure affordable access to devices and plans. Our submission calls for a range of affordability measures, including requirements for providers under the legislation to offer baseline mobile plans and prepaid services, incentives to increase the availability of low-cost LEOSAT-compatible devices, including a device distribution program for low-income customers, and explicitly applying the UOMO to both mobile network operators as well as mobile virtual network operators to promote competition and affordability. ACCAN also calls for a dedicated statutory objectives section to guide future ministerial decision-making under the legislation to prioritise consumer needs, reliability, affordability and public safety. ACCAN strongly supports the ministerial powers in the bill to set reliability standards and urges the Minister to swiftly implement these standards if and when the bill is passed. Our submission also called for some expansion and alignment of these powers, as well as the application of civil penalties and consumer compensation for breaches. Finally, I note that much of the feedback on the bill is centred around the legislated timeframes for the framework, with some calling for the start date to be removed altogether and the UOMO to commence as late as 2030. With some providers already advertising direct-to-device functionality for texts, and our neighbours in New Zealand recently announcing Spark satellite plans, ACCAN questions the validity of claims that the UOMO could be in place no earlier than 2030. However, we do acknowledge that satellite-enabled voice capability is not yet widely available, and technical and market readiness is critical to the UOMO's reliability and safe functionality. If implementation were pushed back, ACCAN strongly calls for the implementation of mandatory domestic roaming in the interim. Just this year, the OECD found that Australia's high retail prices and limited improvement in mobile service quality were largely due to a lack of competitive pressure on the three major providers, making entry by new players difficult. Providers are also decreasing investment in infrastructure, particularly in remote areas, with a senior industry stakeholder recently saying, "We have reached the geographic and economic edge of where telcos are willing to invest in terrestrial mobile infrastructure." Claims that mandatory domestic roaming would disincentivise providers to invest in infrastructure and would negatively impact competition just don't stack up. In research recently commissioned by ACCAN from Essential Research, a national representative cohort of around 1,000 consumers were asked, how strongly do you support or oppose the introduction of a domestic mobile roaming service? 73% of consumers supported that proposal, with only 5% opposing. ACCAN urges this committee and the government to seriously consider this critical step towards providing Australians more reliable, more competitive and more widespread coverage. I thank the committee for your time today, and I'm happy to take any further questions, as is my colleague Gareth Downing.
Thank you very much. Senator Hanson-Young.
Thank you. Ms Bennett, thanks for being here today. Obviously, we've heard from a number of community-focused groups this morning, and a lot of their concerns go to the issues that you've raised. So let me try and be specific here. Your concern with this legislation is that unless there is specific requirements, that the notion of universal access will simply be that and won't actually be enforced. Is that a fair summary of your position?
Yes, I think it is, Senator. We certainly think, that for too long we have relied on private providers to do the right thing. That has not always delivered, and it certainly hasn't delivered for R consumers who've borne the brunt of that and the cost of that and the impact of that when it comes to accessibility for their work, for their education, for their safety. And so this is too important to leave up to private providers to provide a public service, particularly a public safety service, and that is why we think that domestic mobile roaming, as well as temporary disaster roaming, which is so critical as we've seen in the disaster season, but just domestic mobile roaming, as per most international colleagues, countries, this is just something that Australia should have in place with vast distances and geographical challenges to ensure that people living in the regions get appropriate access so that they can conduct their lives in a way that doesn't disadvantage them and continue to create a digital divide.
And you're saying that should be part of this. It shouldn't just be that providers should have an obligation to make sure the service is available. It's like, well, if we're really going to fill the gaps, there has to be the ability to easily transfer.
That's right, because we do need the terrestrial infrastructure. We really do support that because this is an evolving technology, and so we will always need both, a very high quality, reliable domestic infrastructure, but obviously satellite is going to become increasingly important, and as the technology evolves, it will become even more so. So we need both. But if we're going to have a system that delivers, particularly in the regions, it does need to have some reliability standards, which is why we think it's so important that this legislation enable those ministerial powers to be brought into place, and it could be developed alongside the development of the technology.
And what is there enough in this bill that goes to the importance of 000 itself? You've talked about safety. We know that universal access is broader than just being able to, pick up the phone and call the ambulance. People need to be able to conduct their work, as you say, access education. Universal access is not just about when something is an emergency. Right. It's meant to be there the rest of the time as well. But in an emergency, is there enough guarantees in this piece of legislation?
Well, not in its current form, I would say. So, and that really goes to the heart of the evolution of the technology and its capacity to serve as a safety net. And really that's the intent that we see, that it's so important in this bill, is that it provides equitable universal access by providing a safety net, particularly to people in the regions and those who are more vulnerable. Because if it doesn't do that, those people miss out. And we already know, I mean, we hear from many regional consumers, but also our Indigenous colleagues, that they very often don't have access to 000 already. So, you know, that's a luxury they don't have much of the time. That's a real concern. This is where domestic roaming in the interim, until this bill is up and running and this technology is available, could enable people in those regions to get access. Now, that shouldn't be based on commercial decisions of big telcos. That should be based on what's in the public interest and the public safety.
Why do you believe there is such resistance to domestic roaming? Like what is it that is stopping this from happening? As you say, other parts of the world, comparable countries, have this as a usual function. Anyone who travels overseas can see that. You see your phone go from provider to provider to provider, depending on where you are.
Yes.
What is the blockage here in Australia to domestic roaming?
We haven't mandated it. We have not said to the big telcos, and we've allowed one in particular to dominate, and they have a market advantage from not having roaming. So I'm pretty certain Telstra would oppose this outright. Some of the others may not have the same resistance because they would benefit if this were available to them, particularly the smaller providers. But we have enabled that situation to evolve. So there is no... I mean, they've had the opportunity to look at this over a number of years and have not been able to come up with, with anything that would enable the sharing of infrastructure because it's not in the commercial interests, particularly of our biggest telco. This should be about what's in the public interest.
And, to that point, of course, we're also the sister committee to this one currently investigating the failures of the 000 system itself. I mean, one of the key problems with the failure for members of the public to connect to 000 is if their provider has gone down or something has happened, they haven't been able to connect. Could I ask you about the attitude of the providers and the regulator in relation to this public interest kind of need?
Well, it's interesting, Senator, because we at ACCAN have done some research through our consumer sentiment tracker, which we do regularly, and on a whole range of issues affecting consumers. And as the peak national body representing communications consumers, it is our role to provide the voice for consumers of communications, particularly those that don't have access to a voice. That's our job. It has been really interesting that in putting out information about consumer experience, that there has been an enormous backlash from the telco industry and the regulator to information that is pretty stock standard consumer sentiment, survey questions around whether people have experienced problems with accessing 000, whether they have confidence in it, and a whole range of, we do ask them a whole range of other questions, but the 000 questions have been a particular issue to the point where, for the first time to our knowledge, and we have not been able to see any record of the regulator ever issuing a Section 522 notice on a consumer organisation to provide information around a consumer sentiment survey Now, that carries with it very significant penalties, such as imprisonment and significant fines in the tens of thousands of dollars. They've issued that to us, even though we've provided them with everything ACCAN could provide, spreadsheets, the methodology, the report findings. They want even more detailed information about the methodology, which we don't have because we didn't provide the data, we didn't do the survey. We commissioned an expert body to do that.
So, sorry, just so that we're all clear here, ACCAN does a regular consumer sentiment survey.
Yes.
You've done your latest one has been out for a number of weeks,
Yes.
and you're saying the regulator and the telecommunications companies have taken issue with the findings in that public sentiment survey.
Yes.
I know that you've given us, through the References Committee, a number of documents and letters that you've received from both the regulator, ACMA, and Telstra in relation to that. What's their gripe? What's the problem they have with you going and surveying members of the community about their experience and their views?
Well, there seems to be a presumption that by putting out public information that, consumers have told us, and it's a yes/no answer, did the 000 system work for you or a family member in the last 12 months during a mobile outage? And 1 in 10 people said, no, it didn't. That they seem to think that there's some kind of interpretation required in that answer and that we've been misleading because we put it out. I just think they don't like the answer. And the reality is, if they don't like the answer, where's their data to refute that? And we haven't seen any. I mean, are they looking at, has the regulator ever looked at whether or not people not getting through to 000 are having difficulty getting through, and why not? And where's the data about these people that are not getting through? Because quite clearly, I know I'm one of the 1 in 10. One of my family members 3 weeks ago was unable to get through to 000 when calling it and had to wait 2 minutes to camp on. So I don't think it's unusual, given that we've heard from the telcos more recently that it can take up to 2 minutes to camp on. Well, if it's taking up to 2 minutes to camp on, it's because people are not getting through. So that seems to be the issue. So
you've put out this survey. I mean, I find it extraordinary that the regulator, whose job it is to hold the telecommunications companies to account over their failures to deliver services, and we know there's been a litany of failures, particularly in the last 12 months, leading to the worst outcomes, and that, of course, we know is a number of deaths of people who died before the ambulance was even aware that it needed to get there. So the regulator has taken issue with you putting out this information. It is their job to actually hold these companies to account, right? I find that. And could you explain to me, what is a Section 522?
It's a coercive power that's only used in the most... in fact, we haven't seen them use it very often at all. We've tried to find instances of when they've used it. But it's a coercive power under the Act that enables them to force us to provide a whole range of data. In this instance, we had to go to Essential Research, who is the third-party provider, and pay them to produce all of this technical data that we do not have access to. We gave them all the spreadsheets. The spreadsheets outlined the location, the gender, the age of the people responding, but they wanted more. So, and if we don't provide that within 5 working days, that there's a risk of imprisonment or serious fines. Like, this is very serious legal action by the regulator.
So, I mean, we've had and we will have the regulator ahead of us again today. But we've had the regulator in front of this committee and the References Committee a number of times and heard from them about how they sat on their hands in relation to the Optus failures and other serious failures of the telecommunications companies. So you're saying that they've issued you this very serious coercive order, this power, yes, to cough up this information, which in fact you don't even have, yet they haven't used these powers against Telstra or Optus or TPG.
Certainly not on any of these issues that we're aware of. They have used it in the past on telcos where telcos have been behaving egregiously, have not provided information and data, but certainly not to our knowledge ever for a consumer group.
Because they don't like the answer of what the public is saying, which is 1 in 10 people say they've had a problem and many more say they've got serious concerns and doubts about the 000 system.
47% say they have no confidence that they'll get through if they try to call 000. Now, you know, I'm sure they don't like that stat either.
Well, it's okay. No, I mean, that's an extraordinary statistic. But that's the problem, yes, if the public think that.
Yes.
So what are they doing to go and fix that?
Yes, exactly.
And right, reinstate confidence, fix the system, show it's been fixed, rather than effectively shutting you down for being the messenger. They're shooting the messenger by attacking ACCAN, aren't they?
They are. And, you know, I mean, it was interesting because we had the Australian Telecommunications Alliance first. Luke Coleman he put out first a media release, which was quite extraordinary, calling it so-called research. And then he wrote to me saying, you should remove this, it's misleading.
Hit a sensitive chord.
Well, we've definitely hit a chord. And then we had Telstra twice. I had their group general counsel write to me demanding that I immediately remove any references to the 1 in 10 figure. And that we retract it, we put out a press release, we say, you know, we were wrong. We dispute that. Our information is still on our website because essential media stand by this research, so do we. And, you know, you can't change what the community believe is their experience. If they believe that, what it should be is a canary in the coal mine. What we should be seeing from the telcos and the regulator is every effort to try and look at what this is about, because it isn't about whether or not we've tried to change. I don't know what the implication is, whether they think we've tried to change what is a yes-no answer into something that is misleading, or whether we've withheld information. We don't believe we have. And they certainly now have all of the information from essential research. So it's bizarre. It's overreach.
Well, and they haven't coughed up the information themselves. I mean, no. I know there's a number of senators on this table, but, you know, myself included, have asked for this information over and over again to the regulator, to the companies, and they don't have it. No. So they're shooting you because you do have it, and they don't like what they're hearing.
They don't like the answer.
We just have a copy of those letters on notice as well.
We do, Sarah. We do, Sarah. Yeah, we do have them in the other committee, but maybe we should table them
just
into this one.
This bill inquiry. Thank you.
The reason I'm raising these questions now is because I think it is extraordinary that this that the regulator is behaving in this way and basically covering the backsides of the very companies they're meant to regulate. But we've got a bill in front of us that is about saying that these obligations are going to need to be delivered in the public interest. What faith should we have that the regulator is going to enforce any of them if they don't even like hearing basic information from a consumer sentiment survey?
Well, this is very serious. I mean, as you've heard from our colleagues earlier, this is about people's access and capacity to conduct their lives in a way that enables them to work, to get education for their children, to get access to health services, to contact 000. Can we put our faith in private providers, and we have done that for a very long time in this country. We've allowed them to self-regulate, and here's where we are. And even something as simple as saying, well, consumers have said this, that this is their experience, seems to be a no-go zone, which suggests to me there's a problem. I mean, to me, that kind of overreach suggests we have a serious problem. Now, they would argue most likely, and they have in the notice to us, that the reason they are doing this, they have 3 reasons that they've outlined, but one of those reasons, 2 of those reasons relate to the minister's need for information. I mean, if the minister wants information, she or her office can ask us for that because we're funded through the Commonwealth. So this through an agreement.
This is the other element here. I mean, you head a body that is designed specifically, funded specifically to ensure that there is public voice and a representative for the community at the table.
That's right.
It's the whole purpose of ACCAN, right?
That's right.
Was so that in a system where you've got private operators, there would be somebody at the table who could advocate for the public interest.
That's right.
And that is all that is what you were doing, and you're taking that job very seriously.
We are.
But the regulator doesn't like hearing it. They
do not like this research related to 000, or they at least. They're questioning whether it's misleading. We do not believe it's misleading. We've worked very closely with Essential Research at every step of the way to ensure that it represents, the quality, the reliability of data. It is not, we didn't go and stand on a street corner and ask people what they think. We've actually commissioned research to ensure that it is rigorous and valid. And so this is why, Senator, we won't remove that research, because we think it should be in the public. It's got to be in the public interest. Now, if consumer groups like us, who are not well resourced, are sitting in front of you in public inquiries, parliamentary inquiries, and we can't put on record, what we believe to be important information that you should know in the context of your decision making, and we're receiving, coercive powers notices. I mean, just having that sort of huge, legal sledgehammer directed at us for putting out research that's legitimate, then I don't know how anyone can have confidence that this system is representing consumer interests, because it undermines that confidence, and we should be able to do that without this kind of
intimidation.
Intimidation and pressure.
Final question, if I could. Firstly, I think we've got the letters that Telstra sent to you and the industry group sent to you. I don't think we have a copy of the notice itself. And when did the notice come?
On the 14th of April, Tuesday last week.
So if you could forward that to us,
sure.
That would be helpful. I just wanted to pick up on one point that I am concerned about, both from ACMA's letter to you and Telstra's letter to you, is the reference to this information being particularly sensitive because of parliamentary scrutiny. How did you interpret that?
That's putting pressure on us as a witness to a Senate inquiry.
Absolutely.
Not to.
This is disgraceful.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're quite offended by the fact that, we're doing our job, representing consumer voices, and we're being pressured in this way. And some of that correspondence, you will see, is quite targeted, quite offensive in its inference, and we take issue with it. We do not believe that it's appropriate.
It's like something out of 1984, you know. Not allowed to ask the questions, not allowed to question anything, just, you know.
Senator, I'd have to say I've never, I've been running national peak bodies for 25 years, and in all of this time we've been putting out consumer sentiment data. I've never ever had this kind of reaction from any sector because it's just considered that's what consumer groups do. I mean, if big industries want to argue the toss, they put out their own data or they refute it.
Yeah.
That hasn't happened here.
I know. All right. Thank you. Well, we will take this up with ACMA and the telcos later today as well. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Senator Hanson-Young. Senator Henderson.
Thank you so much, Chair. Thank you very much for your evidence so far, and I'm delighted to hear your very strong advocacy for domestic mandatory mobile roaming.
Thank you.
The time has come.
Yes.
And it is appalling that so many regional Australians are being denied connectivity because, in essence, Telstra wants to maintain its monopoly over its own towers and infrastructure. Why is mandatory mobile roaming so important?
Well, it's so important because it provides that safety net that other countries already have that we don't have in Australia. We have a big country, geographical challenges. We have people living in the regions, and we heard this morning from Susie Teagan and our rural friends that there is a significant and important reason to invest in these communities because they deliver a lot of our wealth, but also they deliver important services that we all rely on. So, in order to support those communities and sustain those communities, connectivity is not a luxury. It is absolutely essential. And it shouldn't be the case that people living in these regions are having to go without access to 000 even because they haven't got connection for weeks on end. We shouldn't see a situation where people can't work, they can't educate their kids, they can't access basic health services if they have a chronic condition. So this is just too important to leave to commercial interests. It's well beyond time. And I know that the Minister has, and we welcome this, mandated that there be temporary disaster roaming for the next emergency season. That's just so critical.
Well, it's not in this bill. So temporary disaster roaming is not in this bill, which is frankly a very big oversight.
Right.
Mandatory domestic roaming is not in this bill. There is a one-size-fits-all relying on satellite technologies only, which don't currently exist in this country. And it's deeply offensive that if you are visiting from overseas, you can mobile roam onto any carrier's network.
Yes.
But if you're Australian, you can't.
Yes.
And if you're in the regions, it's deeply offensive if you are an Optus customer, for instance, and there's a Telstra tower nearby that you cannot access it at a commercial rate, of course. No one's suggesting to Telstra that they give this away for nothing, but that is deeply offensive, wouldn't you think?
I think it is, very much so. And I think it's, it's a no-brainer that as a country, we should provide a safety net to some of our most vulnerable communities. And we know that many people, when we talk about affordability, we're talking about, you shouldn't spend more than 2% of your income in having to support connectivity, because some people out in these regions are spending 10% or more of their income on connectivity. Now, that's a really significant impost. That means people are going without other essential services to accommodate, what is an essential service to enable them to sustain their lives. So, yes, it's absolutely something that has to happen. And we're concerned that this bill and the attempt to delay the satellite direct-to-device services until commercial arrangements are in place for the telcos, that will it mean that those regions will be left without that connectivity in that interim space.
What's also alarming about this bill is there is not a dollar of government investment.
Well, I mean, we will certainly need to see investment because, you know, and we know...
I say that the bill does not include any requirement on the government to invest in mobile connectivity in the regions under circumstances where programs like the Mobile Black Spot program have been axed. So the government thinks it can just pass this bill, which is a lot of smoke and mirrors, without putting any investment into regional comms in regional Australia.
Well, we know that taxpayers have footed the bill for a very long time. So, you know, in terms of the infrastructure that's out there now for terrestrial networks, and really, unless there is some kind of safety net, and I would think a safety net does have to be supported by the government because if you don't do that, you can't rely, as we've seen, on commercial networks to find that in their interest to support. They're interested in supporting their shareholders and that's their motivation, but I think there is an imperative to provide a safety net and that will most likely need significant investment.
My concern also about temporary disaster roaming, and this works by designating a geographic area where the disaster is occurring, is if you've got an ambulance travelling to a disaster area but not in the designated geographic area, then they will be denied the opportunity to roam onto another carrier's network. I mean, it just seems very arbitrary.
Yes, and
that this temporary disaster roaming would operate in such a bureaucratic way that it has to be designated. And often in times of disaster, you need help immediately, perhaps within seconds, perhaps within minutes, not waiting for some bureaucrat in Canberra to designate an area as being a temporary disaster roaming area.
Yeah, and we've certainly heard from some of the emergency services that they would like to see this. I'm just aware my colleague Gareth has a comment to make on that too, but they also support this very strongly.
Mr. Downing, do you have anything further to add?
I was just going to say, I think the other thing to note here is that ACCAN has been very forthright publicly about the need to have appropriate spectrum licensing conditions and conditions on telcos around these issues. And we certainly support comments from the New South Wales Telco Authority around making sure that there's appropriate conditions in place under the spectrum licensing arrangement or via carrier license conditions to ensure that there is that prioritised access for emergency services, because I think that would go some of the way to addressing the issue that you've raised in terms of ensuring that there's a dedicated amount of bandwidth and access to dedicated spectrum for the purposes of emergency services, which would help alleviate that issue you've raised.
And Ms. Bennett, I have to say you do a great job representing the interests of consumers, and I am also alarmed by the heavy-handed way that the regulator has approached you following the release of your survey, which shows that many Australians can't access 000 reliably. I mean, frankly, the regulator needs a wake-up call if they're coming down on you rather than addressing the shortfalls with the carriers. But more broadly, in the interests of consumers, I mean, this is all about making sure that consumers are put first.
Yes.
And that's, I guess, in many respects, we are concerned that this bill does not do this, because the obligations, equitable access, reasonable obligations to provide universal outdoor mobile access are very vague and uncertain. How could the bill be remedied in that respect?
Well, I think it goes to the heart of what Gareth was just saying. I think we need to ensure that the minister can mandate reliability standards, can set the tone for what we expect, what is required of the telcos, how it will roll out, the timeframes. That needs to be in place as the technology catches up, but we need to have that in place. And we could do that now because it is so fundamentally important. Other essential services have reliability standards. This sector does not. I mean,
But can
energy
I just
has them.
pick you up on that, just playing devil's advocate? If you've got a reliability standard, say, let's have a look at the town of Burke in far western New South Wales, that there's a minimum reliability standard for mobile, but there is no connectivity. So how can the carriers meet that reliability standard under those circumstances? So what will drive, in other words, that investment in regional connectivity?
I'm going to pass this to Gareth because this is his area of expertise and he loves reliability.
So I think going to this point, there's a variety of different mechanisms. You can establish spectrum licensing conditions where you would offer a discount in exchange for a binding commitment to invest in worse served communities. So that would supplement things like your mobile black spots program. But I think what's important about this is with reliability standards comes something that I think this industry doesn't have, which is transparency. When you're trying to design these programs to deliver for worse served communities in the energy sector, you can go through and you can see which communities are worse served, what's happening from an engineering standpoint, what's happening from a connectivity standpoint. And to be frank, I don't think we have that. I think this committee heard last year from Telstra that there were 5,000 outages impacting networks, impacting access to 000 because they were the only network available. That was the evidence that they put to the committee at the end of last year. So I think having that information helps you right-size and target those investment programs. It's going to require government investment. It's going to require private investment, but there are a variety of different levers that can be used to make those funds flow to the communities that are most critical, most impacted.
I know you want to wind me up, Chair. Ms Bennett, just anything else that you wish to add in relation to your concerns about this bill?
Look, for us, I guess this morning there was discussion around equity. For us, as I said, like 2% of somebody's income should determine whether or not there is, they shouldn't have to spend more than 2% of their income. So for us, affordability is about the ability to pay for communication services without sacrificing other essential needs. I mean, that could be better defined in this bill. We know that anyone that's spending more than that is under affordability stress, and then that brings major barriers to accessing services. And we know that for some communities in rural triple R areas, the median household income is between 33 and 51,000. So, it's a really important equity measure that we have that definition in place. We know that some of the households on the lowest incomes are below $41,000 a year in those regions. We know that in remote areas, some people are being paid $459 a week. And in Indigenous First Nations communities, 69% of people reported they are sacrificing essential, food, other costs to ensure that they can connect. So it is really important that we get this right. It must be a safety net. We must ensure the Minister has powers to put in place reliability standards now. This can't wait. This is just so important. This is an essential service and it should be treated that way as other sectors are. And we would also like to see domestic mobile roaming become, the fallback should this be delayed, because people can no longer continue to stay in situations where their safety is at risk, their lives are set aside by not being able to connect to the work, education, health and safety services that they really need to function.
Thank you so much, Ms Bennett. Appreciate your time. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Senator Henderson. Senator Walker.
Thank you, Chair. I just have one question. We know that there are a range of views around the mobile satellite spectrum allocation. In the opinion of your organisation, what would be your preferred approach to this issue?
The allocation, as in the auction process, or as in the what are we talking about specifically?
As in the auction process.
So on spectrum, I mean, ACCAN's position has always been there needs to be competition in the market. We believe that ACMA's taken that decision offline and said we are not going to auction. So that being the case, what we would like to see is conditional licences applied, and that's why we're supporting reliability standards, Senator, because UOMO offers a way to do that. The other option is to use the spectrum allocation to do that, to use the carrier licence to put in place reliability standards that are so desperately needed in this sector. If we're not going to auction and we're not opening up to competition that ACMA says isn't there, well, then we do need to have some standards applied, just as the energy sector does. I mean, 20 years ago we used to have a lot of power outages too, and the energy sector has been uplifted enormously in terms of its role as an essential service provider, and the requirements and obligations on that sector mean that Australians know that they can rely on there being standards in place that are enforceable. We don't have that here, so we'd like to see a conditional licence applied, because that is really important to ensuring that Australians get the services that they're paying for, expect, and we should ensure as a country as a safety net.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ms Bennett, and thank you to your colleague as well, Dr Downing, for joining us today. I would like to, you go with the committee's thanks, but if you could respond to any questions on notice or documents requested no later than 1 May, please. Thank you very much. The next witnesses